One of our most viewed videos on YouTube is you grinding a big Cummins crankshaft.
Right.
So I thought today, let's film you grinding this little tiny crankshaft.
You think I can do a little one?
Well, I hope so.
Sometimes the little ones give you more trouble than the big ones.
I was thinking that. Give us a little background on what this little crankshaft is.
It's a international, what they referred to as a Cub C60 engine. This particular one, I believe they said it's a 1948 model. My job here today is to get this crank round. It is already 10 on the rods and mains, and I told the customer to get us 20 under bearings, both rods and mains. And as I started looking at it here this morning to get started, I'm almost kind of regretting having told him to get those bearings, because I'm not sure this thing's going to clean up at 20 under. It has quite a little wear on it, on rods and mains.
Yeah.
And I think I can make the rods come in, but I'm a little bit concerned that might not be able to clean up the mains, so we're going to have to...
So you've got a challenge.
I've got a challenge ahead of me here.
Well, I was just going to show, this is the engine block that you've already, looks like, done some machine work on. Yeah. This looks pretty similar to those Massey Harris Pony. We did two of those blocks recently.
Yeah.
And I think those were they N62s or were they?
They were Continental N62 engines, 62 cubic inch, so they were 2 cubic inch larger than what this one is. And the two tractors compete with each other. They were both on the market at the same time. A lot of small garden type farms use these.
But just, you know, that's 2 hands length.
Yeah, my 2 hands cover the length of that. This is our little International Cub connecting rod. Most everybody knows what a 350 Chevrolet rod looks like. So there we are, already considerably bigger than our little Cub rod here. And then just for fun, we've got a John Deere here in the shop, 466 John Deere diesel engine. The wrist pin end of that rod is the same size as the connecting rod end of our little Cub rod.
Okay, well, let's start grinding the crank.
Okay.
Hey guys, quick break to tell you about the sponsor of today's video, Prize Picks. With football season upon us, Prize Picks is the most fun and exciting way to get in on the action while you watch your favorite sports and players. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. I'm excited about week 1 of the NFL season kicking off, so to get in on the action, I picked Tyreek Hill for more than 96.5 receiving yards, Josh Allen for less than 240.5 passing yards, Caleb Williams for more than 237.5 passing yards, and of course, I had to make a pick from my own hometown team of Denver, so I picked Cortland Sutton for more than 52.5 receiving yards. Download the app today and use code JIMSAUTO to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. 1 Caleb Williams passing yard gets you 1 win on Prize Picks every week in September. That's right, only 1 yard gets you an automatic win every football weekend in September. 4 weeks of free W's. Don't miss this deal on Prize Picks because it's gone when September ends. Again, download the app today and use code JIMSAUTO to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game.
So one of the first things I want to do with the crank is check it, make sure it's straight. So with that, I've only got a couple thousandths there.
Okay.
Which you have to kind of take that with a grain of salt, because that could be some of the wear on these journals letting the crank move up and down also.
I was going to ask, when you see, I could easily see on the rod journals how they could be worn really, really out of round. When you see wear on main journals, I mean, is it one-sided wear like it is on a rod journal still?
It's still one-sided wear on the mains also, because when this cylinder fires and pushes down on that connecting rod there, the underside of this crank is
still
where,
taking
it's taking the
brunt
beating.
of the force.
Yeah, so the top side of the rod here is taking the force, and the bottom side of the crank is taking the force. So I think we're okay as far as straight goes. I don't think it's warped or anything like that. If it was, we'd have to straighten it. That's a matter of running this cylinder up against it, putting some force on it, and a blunt chisel working in the inside of the radiuses on the rods there.
It's not the most beautiful process.
No, it's pretty crude process, but that's how it's done.
Yeah.
But it is very crude looking. You don't want your customer watching you do that. All right, so journals are very narrow on this. I have my narrowest wheel mounted on the grinder here. This is the wheel that's always referred to as a Widowmaker or the suicide wheel. Guy I learned a little bit from grinding cranks from, he always called it the suicide wheel. This wheel is not as narrow as some. I cannot do Subaru cranks here because the journals are so narrow on those, and I've never purchased a wheel that's narrow enough to do those. But this is my narrowest wheel. We need to offset our chucks here. I want to make sure they're perfectly on zero, so I'll use my setting fixture here. So I bring that in, make sure my indicator is on zero, and then I transfer that measurement over here to the chucks. They should also be on zero. See if I can change that one just a little bit. There. We'll do the same thing on this side. Oops. Yeah, there we are. We've got both of those zeroed in this direction. But now I need to offset those by 1/2 of the stroke length of this engine. I've looked up my specifications here. My stroke is 2.750, so half of that is 1.375. So I'll loosen the little cap screws here that hold the chucks in place. The scale on here, but this scale actually reads in the stroke of the crank. So what I say, 2 3/4?
Yeah, 2.750.
So I'll run that to 2.750. Same thing on this one. Then we have counterweights in here, and I'll have to kind of guess.
Since the chucks and the crank are going to be offset from the center line of the machine, the counterweights in there move offset the opposite direction to balance everything.
Yeah, try to keep everything in balance, because see there, I took it loose and it's not quite balanced, but it doesn't just flop clear off to the other side.
And you'll have a little more weight by the time you put the crank in.
When I put the crank in, I'll have to readjust those. So now I gotta get those exactly to that correct stroke length. Bring my gauge back up here now, and I'm going to set a micrometer to 1.375, which is half the stroke length. I'll adjust this to match. Okay. I have to transfer that measurement to the chuck. And you can see I missed it by about 0.003, which is pretty darn close considering just kind of doing it by that gauge, by that scale. Okay, so there's that one. This one I missed by a lot.
I think crankshaft grinding takes a lot of machinist finesse learned over decades of...
Well, that's it. There is, you learn your machine. You learn what your machine feels like when it's running correctly. So now I'm kind of snugging the chucks down again. They're not so tight that I can't move them, but they're tight enough that they won't move while I'm grinding. This crankshaft, time I get it in there, I need about 17 inches. What'd I say that was, 17? Okay, there's that. This makes it easy when you pick it up and hold it with one hand. Maybe I'll give that just a little bit more on this side. Catch it with 2 teeth on the jaw there. Now when I rotate this crank, make sure I'm not going to hit the wheel back here. I have no journals. There's not a single journal on that crank that is running on center to where I could grind it. Number 1 here is close.
But it's still kind of going on a eccentric almost.
Going around on eccentric. So if I bring this crank into this position right here, lock the chucks to where I can rotate it in there. Then I bring in this V-block, push that into the crank. So I'm square on the table down here, and I bring that directly into that V. Then I tighten the crank. Now watch. When I spin that around, these two journals are running on center to where I could grind them. And then I can loosen the chucks, turn this 180 degrees. And now I should be able to grind those two. Isn't that slick?
Pretty slick.
They're not perfect right now, but we'll make some more fine adjustments here and get that to where they are running exactly on center.
Do you make it perfect to the blueprint, meaning is the stroke length exactly what the book says it should be? And is every journal rotationally offset exactly what it should be? Or do you have to fudge those numbers a little bit to save this crankshaft at 20 undersize instead of going to 30?
I'm going to say we're going to end up fudging this crank. Okay, let's see where we really are now. We just did some rough adjustments when we put that crank in. Now I got to really dial it in to get truly on center with that journal. My crank grinder is marked here A, B, C, D, 4 positions 90 degrees apart. If I check from position D, watch my needle here. By the time I get up to A, I've gone clear around, lost track of where we're at. So I'm going to tweak this just a little bit, see where we're at now. Okay, I'm real close to coming up the same spot when I turn halfway around. But now if I check the stroke length, I go from what is position C over here. I'm at about the 18 on the dial here. And I come back down here, I'm about 11. So I need to bring the crankshaft this way 3.5 thousandths. If this was a high performance, all out race car motor that we wanted everything exactly the right stroke, exactly the right index, we'd be setting this by the machine, not by the crank. But I'm trying to just clean this crank up, because if the stroke or the index is off a little bit, it's not going to matter on this little tractor motor.
You're giving life to an engine that he said that tractor is a 1948. I think, if I read right, about the second year the Farmall Cub was produced.
Okay, so now that probably messed with my index just a little bit, so let me correct the index again first.
Is there an order? Do you have to do index first and then?
It makes things go easier for you if you do, because the index is usually what's off the farthest. Trying to make my machine match that crankshaft, more than likely my index is what's going to be the farthest off. So on my index, position D, I'm at what, about 15.5 or a little better. I go here, position B, same thing.
Okay.
And then the stroke, position C, I'm right at a little above 14, is it there? And I come around over here, halfway around, I'm a little above 14 again. So why are those two numbers different? Why aren't they exactly the same? And why is that needle wiggling like that when I'm spinning this crankshaft around?
Because it's an egg.
Because it's an egg. We just centered an egg on here to grind. Now, if I wanted to completely match the stroke from when this was brand new, and knowing our wear is mostly on this side here, if I check that point,
yep,
the point that's not worn on the back, and this point over here, I could probably pretty well match where the crank was when it was brand new. I'm going to try to go back to the center line of where that was when it was brand new. All right, so I've readjusted this to where I think I'm more on the original center line of that rod journal, because if I measure on the 3 sides of that journal that are not significantly worn, I've centered up the machine to that, and then it'll show how much wear we have. Because I'm on the side here, just about slightly under the 16 on the dial. I go to the back side, a little over 16. I probably overdid it just a little bit. Come back to this side, right close to the 16 again. But now I go to the side that is worn, and that drops down about 4/1000ths of an inch. So what that means is if I'm trying to grind this crankshaft and keep the center line of that journal exactly where it was when it was new, and I'm taking it down 10/1000ths of an inch, I'm only removing 5/1000ths of an inch on each side.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got 4+ thousandths wear right there. So unless I fudge the stroke length a couple thousandths here, I'm not going to be able to clean that crank up in another 10/1000ths.
Right.
So I would rather lengthen the stroke on that journal a couple thousandths and save that crank in another 10/1000ths than to have to take it 20 under, and basically we're at the end of the life of the crank, because I don't know if they make bearings any more than 30.
So back to centering up on the wear.
I'm going to center back up on the wear. And where I'm at right now, we're still not quite the blueprint. I'm 1.5 thousandths, so it would be 3/1000ths overall. I'm 3/1000ths off from what the blueprint says this crankshaft is going to be, or supposed to be, and I'm going to end up making it about 6. I'm going to increase the stroke by 6/1000ths of an inch overall. When it gets down to that, we just gave the guy ever so slightly more cubic inch and just a little bit more compression.
And it's almost certainly negligible.
Yeah, you would never be able to measure it. 16. I think we're ready to start grinding here. We are 6/1000ths longer stroke than what the blueprint says we are. The crankshaft, I think, was 3/1000ths longer
To start with?
To start with, yeah. And again, this has been ground before, so maybe the last guy changed the stroke on it a little bit too. But bottom line, it's not going to hurt anything on this engine. There's not going to be any clearance problems or anything.
Yeah, if this causes piston valve clearance issues on a flathead
motor, we have really got some problems.
you did something really wrong.
You know, turn a little bit of coolant on. I need to kind of finish setting up my Arnold gauge here. If we're going to assume that it is about 10/1000ths to go, I'm going to put my high side here, needle coming back to the 10. But you can see we have got all of 5/1000ths wear on that journal, just the way that needle's bouncing around.
This one, it doesn't know how you have the machine set.
No,
that's truly just showing the run out of the crankshaft.
That follows the run out of the crank. It doesn't matter where that crank is. If that crank was positioned over here going around, it'd be telling me the same thing. If that crank was not on center and it was going around like this, it would still read me
the same
way. Yeah, so that's what's neat about this Arnold gauge, is it just follows the journal itself.
Yeah.
To tell me what's happening. I've got to kind of gradually come in on this. In fact, I'm not going to have that gauge on there at first. I want to be able to see what I'm doing. Good, gradually come in until it just touches off. And a lot of times you can hear that. The water will sound like it starts frying a little bit when you get real, real close. I didn't necessarily hear it. Maybe my ears are getting bad.
I was going to say, you better get some hearing aids.
But did you notice it just touched the crankshaft there, one little spot? So I'm going to traverse over till I'm up against the cheek on that side. So feed it in just a little bit here. Now, I don't know if you can see that.
Not with where I've got your arm in the camera.
Okay. Well, I was just pulling the coolant back a little. Okay, hear that? I'm up against the cheek on that side. So I'm going to back that off just enough to make the sound go away. Let's put the Arnold gauge back on. Boy, there's just not a lot of room on that journal for everything it has to fit on there. I'm going to move my steady rest over just a little bit so it'll give me some more room for the Arnold gauge.
Okay.
There, let's try that. Okay, so you can see I've already taken a little bit of that out of roundness out of that journal.
Yeah.
Let's give it just a little bit more here, see what happens. See, it's not really dropping down this way any farther, but it's taking away
from the
outer roundness on the top side here. So hopefully that comes in round here quickly, and we don't have a lot to work with. Okay, now I'm going to put a little steady rest pressure up under here.
Do you have issues on a crank this small flexing?
Yes.
Because I know you've shown even on those bigger cranks, you can push on them and actually see the deflection.
Yeah, see the deflection on them. So yes, these will do the same thing to you.
But you've damn near got that round at this point.
Yeah, that's pretty close to being round. And now give that just a little bit. You can see my size is actually starting to come down. So as I put a little steady rest pressure under here, hopefully I can get that needle to run all but steady. I may not be able to get it perfect, but should be close.
You're still talking tenths out around.
Oh, right? Yeah. Yeah, we're talking in tenths, not thousandths. Okay, should we take a measurement and see where we're at?
Probably so.
I'm going to set my wheel here at 5 thousandths just because that's an easy number to remember. Back off. And the journal is, the area I'm grinding is clean. So let's see how our size is.
Man, that's a pain in the butt, how skinny everything is there. And
yeah, there's just no room to work. 1.482 7. So what is that? 3
9/10.
Yeah, is that right?
82.7 to 78.8.
Yeah.
Or what, a tenth of a millimeter? Yeah, it's almost exactly a tenth of a millimeter, I think.
I'm not far off here. Running a little bit in the oil hole. Okay, 1, 2, 3, and about 9/10 on the dial there. Okay, let's bring her on down to about 2 thousandths. I think with that, I'm going to sweep over to the side here. Because my grinding wheel is just a little bit narrower than the journal itself, but the journal itself is not enough wider than my wheel that I want to make 2 plunge grinds on it. I'm just going to sweep across. Okay, sound has changed, so I can tell I'm up against the cheek. Let's go back to the side where we started.
It would be kind of cool to have a digital readout. You could zero where the cheeks are.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that does need a some sort of readout side to side on this. That would be a big improvement.
Are you kind of in the oil hole, or what's?
Yeah, I'm just a little bit in the oil hole. If I move over very much at all, I'm past where my wheel is grinding. So I'm kind of running right on the edge there. I think I need to give that one more push to the button, but you know that'll be one push too much as it sits here a little bit.
Sparks out.
Yeah, as it sparks out, I'll be too far. Okay, I'm up against that side. Come back over to the left side here. You know, a lot of times people think they bring this little stuff in and, you know, start telling you how easy it's going to be because it's little, and they think it shouldn't cost much because it's little. And in reality, it's probably more work than the big stuff just because you're fighting the tiny size.
You have to do a bunch of changes to the setup of your machine too. Like you had to change the nozzle on the coolant there to be smaller for the smaller wheel. You might have to change chucks, or at least jaws or whatever.
Well, it looks nice. Does looks mean anything?
Maybe.
Steady rest has kind of left a little bit of a line over here. I'm not sure what that's about. I can't feel it. So it may be just a little bit of grease or something that, yeah, it wipes off. Okay, 1.483.
What?
Is that right? 75?
You were 82.7 the last time.
Oh, excuse me. I added 5 extra on the mic here. 1.4, 78, 6, maybe 7. It was just like I said, my button was halfway in between.
Yeah.
One more push of the button and I overshot just a little bit.
Yeah. The wheel on the right here, you can feed in. That's your manual feed to, well, you're really pulling the grinding wheel into the crankshaft. But that little button right next to it does the same thing in 2 10,000th of an inch increments. When you get down close, you start using that button. I don't know what to call it, but it's more of a mechanical thing than your feel of feeding 2 10,000ths.
So again, I'm having to change my index here just a little bit.
Lunchtime.
Lunchtime. Can we grind one more journal before we go in?
Yeah.
Let's check how far that one's out before I start grinding there. So we're a good 4,000ths out around.
Pretty similar.
Yeah, but we should be able to clean that up, I think. Okay, there we are starting to grind. I'm going to go over till I'm into the cheek there. Okay, we're close to being round. It is running nice and true. It's not giving me a bunch of trouble to make it round or anything.
Yeah.
Okay, why don't I sweep across to the other side at that point. Okay, there I can hear I'm up against the other side. So now I'm going to go back Okay, we got maybe slightly under 1.5 to go. You know, this is going to be just like the other side.
Yeah, you're right. You need one more bump, but...
Okay, there's one more bump. Let's see what happens. I think what I'll do, go back here to the beginning. And I'm going to tweak the steady rest just a little bit. Sometimes you can get just a little bit that way. Let's call it.
I think your needle's stuck.
No, I can see it wiggling.
I don't know. Looked pretty dang good to me.
Okay, 1.478, 8 plus. 1.478. Yeah, we're on the 8. We're right exactly where I wanted to be.
Okay, so you're right at the number that you chose, which is actually 2/10,000ths of an inch inside of spec. Yeah. So you could even be 2/10,000ths larger than what you're coming up at right now.
Yes. And
still be within the tolerance specified by the manufacturer.
This is just my own little thing here. There's a thousandths variation of where you can be, and I like to have the journal ground on the tighter side because I figure it's going to wear down to the lower side soon enough. But I don't want to be beyond the tight side, the larger side. So I just always pick the number. Most of the time the cranks have a 1,000ths tolerance that you can be between. So I always pick 2/10,000ths inside that for the number I want to shoot for. Sometimes you hit it right on, sometimes you may be off one way or the other, but as long as you're within what the manufacturer calls for, everything should work fine.
Huh. Okay, well, let's go eat lunch.
Yeah, let's eat lunch, and then we'll come back and index that around, catch the last two there.
So now you're gonna...
It's time now. We got those first two done. Let's rotate it around on the index, see if we can grind the other two. Theoretically, we should virtually be ready to grind right there. Well, let's check it again. So on our index, we are way off. And that is a factor of the journals on the crank are not indexed all where they should be. And that's not uncommon on an old crank like this.
Rather than these two throws and these two throws being exactly 180 degrees apart, it might be 179 and
179
a half or something.
And so many minutes, or 180 and so many minutes. They are not exactly where they should be.
And you're going to make adjustments to match what is there.
I have to make adjustments to match what is there.
Because it's so far off that if you didn't,
we'd never be able to grind it at any undersize. Okay, there I am close. About 10 off. Close here. Yeah, those are still good. Now let's see how our stroke length is. And there you can see from that point right there on the side, as I come around to the back side, I'm dipping way down in, back to the same again. So now this one, we've got to adjust the stroke back closer to what it was originally. Yeah, because that's off now enough. I don't think we'll be able to clean it up. That's surprising to me. Just for fun, let's move over to this journal. I normally wouldn't go to this much trouble, but since we're doing this to kind of show off. Okay, this one, the index is real close to this one. But again, we're way off on the stroke here. Yeah, we're going to have to bring that back the opposite direction. So let's see if we can make this one close to being round, and then hopefully that one will match or be close enough we can get it to grind and have at least those two be the same. And once again, we have to work with what we have. So I've got it dialed into where I'm center on the
what's there?
On what's there. I'll have to adjust the index between the two a little bit, but I won't have to adjust the stroke length between those two.
And where do you think your stroke length is coming out on those two journals right now? Because you said we ended up about 6 longer on the other side than stock?
Yeah. Okay, so I'll set this on the blueprint. On this side we are, well, it'd be 2/1000ths on the overall length. So these two here are going to be 2/1000ths longer. The other 2 cylinders we did are 6/1000ths longer.
Okay.
Let's see how out of round it is. Just about like the others.
Yeah.
Okay, there, it's barely touched. Okay, go over to the side of the journal, touch off. There that is. I don't know, can you see that on the camera?
Let me, one sec, don't do anything. You can see it, I was just putting it in slow-mo for a sec.
Okay. I wish I could grind without the coolant on there so you could really see it.
So the background on this particular engine is this was a tractor that sounds like the city of Brighton, Colorado used for mowing. Does that sound right?
That's right.
So
a lot of these little tractors were set up with sickle mowers or rotary mowers on them, but I think most of them I ever saw had sickle mowers. They're running up and down the highways mowing the borrow pits.
Originally this probably would have been a red Farmall tractor, but it sounds like they painted it yellow, whether that was to match some of their other industrial type equipment or what at Brighton.
I think that's generally what counties and states do.
Paint them yellow.
Their equipment all the same color.
And then somewhere along the way, somebody bought it from the city and used it.
Used it on their own farm.
Do you remember what year? Or?
I think I heard somewhere around maybe 1970.
And then the guy who's got it now is just doing a restoration. Remembers
it was his dad.
His dad had one, or
no,
it was his?
This was his dad.
Okay, so he's just restoring it. I'm sure there are some of these that still get used around on, you know, smaller farm type stuff.
Well,
not really.
You see, you know, some people may have an acre or two of basically a garden, you know, kind of vegetable garden deal.
Yeah.
And you'll see them used there.
And from the looks of it, it was made under the international name Farmall, McCormick Deering, kind of all three of those. And eventually the company morphed into, or was sold and morphed into your normal Cub Cadet lawn tractors that you can still buy today.
Yeah, but it's no longer part of...
It's no longer part of International. I think it was sold off, or the Cub name and, you know, so on was sold by International in 1981. But again, from the sounds of it, this is a 1948 model, which would have been a pretty early one.
You know, every one of these, I'm coming up right in that spot where if I push the button one more time, it's a little too much.
But if you don't,
but if
maybe not quite enough.
Not quite enough. Okay, 1.4787. Put my Arnold gauge on here. I know you guys can't see it, but Actually, this one has a little less wear than the others did. A little closer to round. Almost like a groove worn into it that I was beginning to wonder if it was going to clean, but it has.
So just some interesting stuff from Wikipedia on the Farmall Cub. It says the market of this little tractor was a small acreage farmer, and it was designed by Farmall engineers in the years following World War II to replace a horse or mule for farming purposes.
Huh.
The tractor was offset to the left while the driver's seat and steering wheel were on the right. This concept was called cultivision, resulting in a clear view while working the fields.
That sounds high tech.
Yeah, it does. The Cub sat on a 69¼ inch wheelbase using a 4-cylinder C60 gasoline L-head engine. 2 5/8 bore by 2 3/4 inch stroke. At 1600 RPM, early versions could pull 30, I don't know what this means, could pull 35 Mickeys, M-I-C-K-E-Y-S, and still had enough to produce 9 1/4 horsepower on the belt and 8 horsepower at the drawbar.
Yeah, I have no idea what they're talking about.
Starting in the 1960s, they steadily increased in powers. Then they had a couple different versions. International Harvester also built Cubs for Europe at a factory in Saint-Dizier, France, starting in 1955, affectionately dubbed the French Cub. The French version became the Super Cub with a more powerful engine in 1958 until production ended in '64. And IH may have also unofficially built some Super Cubs at their factory in Louisville, Kentucky.
What does that mean, unofficially?
I don't know.
That just some of the workers got together and
Maybe.
slipped something out the door?
IH ended production of the Cub at the Louisville, Kentucky plant in 1981. Over 245,000 Cubs were manufactured between 47 and 81, making the Cub arguably the most popular small tractor in history. Due to their versatility, many Cub tractors remain in use on small farms into the 21st century. Comparable products include the Allis-Chalmers G and the Massey Pony, which both use a Continental engine,
both
right?
use that same Continental
N62.
N62 engine.
And then on the Cub Cadet page, says IH Cub Cadet was a premium line of small tractors established in 1960 as part of International Harvester, was a new line of heavy-duty small tractors using components from the previous Cub series tractors. Marketed to the owners of rural homes with large lawns and private gardens. There were a variety of Cub Cadet branded aftermarket attachments available, including mowers, blades, snowblowers, plows, loaders, and carts. But in 1981, due to financial hardships, IH sold the Cub Cadet division to the MTD Corporation, which took over production and use of the Cub Cadet name without the International Harvester symbol. Probably go down to Lowe's and buy a Cub Cadet lawn tractor.
Yeah, but it's not.
It's not the same.
It's not the same.
And it's a completely different tractor than what this is.
It's name only.
Yeah.
Okay, for the record, I came out my 1.4, what is that, 1.4788, right where I wanted to be on that one.
Okay. All of our rod journals look really nice.
They came out very, very nice.
Were they all pretty much on the Arnold gauge as steady as that,
Yeah, they were.
that one?
Yeah, sometimes cranks don't come out that well. But yeah, this one, for being a little tiny, flimsy thing here, and maybe when we show that, we'll put a dial indicator in here when we're doing the mains, and we'll see how much this thing flexes.
Yeah.
Just pulling out a little bit. But anyway, we're ready to take it out now. Pick it right out of here. So now we need to bring both of these chucks back to center. So I'll bring this back to 0. Remember, we got our counterweights in here. Need to bring those back to 0. Whoops, wrong way. That is hard to see. That acrylic they put on here. If it gets hit by any brake parts clean or anything like that, it cracks real bad. Take my indicator.
Do you think they use USA built equipment in Italy?
You know, that'd be interesting to go to another country like that and see where their stuff comes from.
It'd just be fun to walk through their shop and see if it's all recognizable or if it's...
Okay, I'm still good that direction. There we go. Pretty close there. I'm going to leave it because we'll have to adjust it once the crank is in anyway. There we go. All right, so are we ready to put the crank back in?
I don't know. One thing we haven't really commented on yet, it doesn't look like it here, but there's actually, you've dressed a radius on that wheel. Then when you grind your crankshaft, you leave a fillet in the corner there.
Yeah, you don't want to grind that square. You want to try and match what the crank was originally. Looks like we matched this pretty well. Sometimes you'll see people, they'll grind that clear out to a square corner because they don't want to take the time to put a nice radius on the edges of the grinding wheel. And if you grind that out to a square corner, that crank will probably come back to you broken. Okay, just for fun, let's see what happens when I push on that crank. Look at that. Pulling back and forth on it.
Yeah, so it's flexing 1/1000th.
Yeah, oh yeah, that's easy to get 1/1000th out of it or more with not very much effort.
So if you tried to grind really, really aggressively, would it, I mean, it'd be bending kind of?
If you start trying to grind very aggressively and you don't have a steady rest under that journal,
right,
it will make it flex. I need to get this dialed in on center, and as you can see, I have a little better than 2/1000ths run out there. So if I stop back here at position C, I'm at about the 2, and I come around to position A, I'm a little better than 4. So I'm just going to move this back just a little bit to try to get that closer to being on center.
If anybody's ever watched A-Bomb 79 on YouTube, this is kind of like watching him dial something in on his 4-jaw chucks, but
yeah, it's the same idea. Okay, what I got going on there, I think, is mostly just the shaft itself. On the front end of the crank, I always try to dial in where the timing gear is going to be running. I think I'm pretty much on the money there. And the same way on this end, I'm out about 2/1000ths.
And on that end, you're dealing with a little more wear again.
Could be.
Maybe.
Yeah, could be in that area. Okay, I think that's probably about as close as I'm going to get, because the way that needle's wiggling there, I'm definitely fighting some imperfections.
In the surface.
Surface finish imperfections. Even at that, I'm less than probably 3, maybe 4/10,000ths out. Now, let's see where that main is running compared to that rear seal surface. This is the part that may scare us. Not as bad as it could be.
What is that, a thou or two?
2/1000ths. Yeah, that could be a lot worse. Let me see kind of the middle there where it's not worn. But right there, I'm in the middle where there's a groove in the bearing, and it has not worn the crank. And I'm running,
good.
Yeah, I'm running pretty true there. So whoever ground this crankshaft the last time got it centered up with the rear main real well. Well, we got 1/1000th half.
I'd say maybe
probably
almost 2.
Run out, probably due to the crank being bent just a little bit. Okay, now up on the front end here, yeah, we're not quite as true on this end with the timing surface, with timing gear surface, because I'm running pretty good there other than the keyway. But I get over here, even where there's no wear, and it's not dialed in quite as close.
What kind of tolerance is there on that as far as the concentricity between the actual mains and the snout of the crank where the timing's set, and you know, balancer or whatever, any kind of stuff like that
Okay.
rides.
Well, if you, for instance, if you have a crank that's bent real bad and you grind it true, leaving the bend in, that will throw it out of balance.
Right.
That can cause balance problems. This here, I have seen motors where when you turn them, if the sprocket, timing sprocket, or a gear is not concentric with mains, that bottom sprocket or gear is going to be running
Like
eccentric. And then you can feel the timing chain has tight spots in it as you turn the motor around. And then same way, if it's gear to gear like this engine would be, you could have tight spots in the gear and then places where there's extra backlash because it's loose. On the back end, you want to have that rear seal concentric with the main to help it seal, because if
it's
that
off,
crank's
it's gonna
going
not
around
seal
in there
as-
like that, it's not going to seal very well. It's not going to be forgiving of that. The last guy,
Always the last guy.
well, it was the last guy on this one. He took a chisel and chiseled that gear back off of there so he could get in here and grind. Left big old chisel marks in the gear, and there's ding marks here on the edge of this first journal where he drove his chisel back in there. So I think I'm going to try to come in and just bump that edge, clean it up with the side of the crank grinder wheel here once we get the rest of it ground.
So I printed off, or had Josh print off, some questions that we had from the last crankshaft grinding video that maybe we hadn't ever answered.
Yeah, maybe we don't have the answers.
Why do you grind all the rod journals to 10 under instead of, you know, say you had one that needed 10, one needed 20? Why not grind them to different sizes?
Well, you could grind them different sizes, and on rare occasions I have done that, but it's mostly to eliminate confusion and having to buy more than one set of bearings, because bearings come as sets. This engine here, I have to buy a set of 4 rod bearings. I can't buy individual, especially mains. Rod bearings I might be able to, but mains, I certainly can't buy individual mains. So you just make them all the same so they match what you can buy off the shelf parts.
Why would you grind a crankshaft rather than buy a new one?
Well, let me ask you this. Where are you going to go buy a new crankshaft for a 1948 International Cub?
Walmart?
You think? Last time I checked, you had to go to Home Depot.
Yeah.
That's a lot to do with it, is new crankshaft is not always available. Maybe a used one, but we have a used one.
But even on ones where a replacement is available, a lot of times the replacement that's available actually is a remanufactured crankshaft. It just came out of a big rebuilder shop instead of our small mom and pop shop.
Right.
But even if it is a brand new crankshaft, you're probably often, I mean, significantly less than half the cost of a new crankshaft a lot of times to grind it.
Really, the only places you can find a new crankshaft for less money than this is a very common engine, the 350 Chevys, 302 Fords. There's companies out there making cranks for them. Are they as good as the original?
Questionable.
Very questionable at the price they're selling them for. I mean, people ask, you know, what this costs. This particular crankshaft, $150 to grind this.
Which isn't enough.
Which isn't enough. They ask how long that takes. I could turn them out faster, or if we were doing a run of several cranks at once. But I think just doing a one-off crank like this, I would easily have 2 hours in on this, which is not a money maker.
Yeah.
I'm not making any money doing that. At this point in my career, I'm having fun rather than trying to make money.
It pisses me off because I think we need to make $150 an hour, and you're telling me it takes 2 hours. So I'm asking why this isn't, why you're not charging the customer $300.
And I should be,
but
it just doesn't work that way. Okay, I think I have things set here so I can get started on this. So my plan is I'll come in, get my size there. I'm going to have to sweep over to that side because there's just not room between the oil hole and side of that crank to get everything in there to keep measuring. So I'm going to have to kind of do this like we did the rods. The other side over there, I could probably come in with a second plunge on that one, at least to get it close.
What kind of lubricant do you use on the chucks?
They are filled with a, actually, I'm using it right now, a high pressure lubricant that we use in the gearboxes on the irrigation sprinkler out here. It's designed to be in a wet environment where there's possibility of contamination from water, which we have here with the coolant. It's relatively thick, doesn't run out.
So is that shiny all the way across where the groove in the bearing was right now from, is it touching all the way across
in the middle?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's touching all the way around.
But you can see one little...
You can still see a bald spot over on that side there.
Bald spot. No, that's on the back of your head.
Well, they both look the same. And let's see what it looks like has happened with the Arnold gauge. Okay, we've gone from there down to about the 5 again. Let's stop and measure that.
Somebody wants to know about the grit of the wheels and the brand. Aren't most of them Goodson wheels?
Yeah,
or?
most of the wheels we have now, actually this one I'm using is one of the originals that came with the crank grinder. Does not get used very much, so we've never worn it out. But most of the replacements have come from Goodson.
What does a grinding wheel cost?
Again, go look in the catalog, but I'll bet they're $500 or $600. Okay, 1.6084 minus 1.6038 is 4 6/10. You know, I'll bet that really is confusing to our metric people when we start talking about, for instance, having 4 6/10 left. But it makes perfect sense to us. And get my gauge set to that number. Okay, that looks pretty good right there. So let's take it down just a little bit more. Now I'm going to go ahead and sweep across to the right-hand side of that journal. Like I said earlier, I'd much rather have done plunge cuts on this, but there's just not room to fit the steady rest, the Arnold gauge, and that oil hole.
Just taking a look at a Goodson competitor. Crank grinding wheels anywhere from 500 to well over 1,000.
Are they?
Depending on the wheel.
Okay, they're just up against that side. What would have worked better on this is if we'd have swapped out the wheels and put a larger wheel, a wider wheel on to do the mains.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be having the problems I'm having here right now. But again, it takes time to swap wheels. End result, as far as the crankshaft, should all be the same.
That particular manufacturer I was looking at doesn't actually list a grit on their wheels. So I don't know. Can't you control some of how it removes it by your dress?
By how you dress it,
How
yeah.
aggressively you dress the wheel?
Okay, I'm 1.6057. Okay, I should have 1 9/10 to go.
What machine is this? Burco RTM 270?
Yes.
About 1990-ish?
Yeah, 91 or so is, I think, when we got this. I think it was about the same time me and your mom got married. She thought we was going to get rich.
Instead you bought a crankshaft grinder?
Yeah.
What brand and model of toolboxes do you have and how do you like them? We got a little bit of everything.
They're going to laugh when you tell them where most of these came from.
Well, all the new stuff is Harbor Freight. What's this one I keep my camera stuff in? That's a
that came
Cobalt
from
Lowe's?
Lowe's, yeah. A lot of the boxes we've got in here right now, I think, are excellent quality for the owner. But I would not consider all of this stuff to be the quality you would want to have if you had a bunch of random employees in the shop. And I'm not trying to slam employees. but I don't care. Anybody you talk to, employees are harder on equipment than an owner would be. And a lot of these toolboxes would not stand up to hard use.
Those drawers are not opened 50 or 100 or 200 times a day, like would be in a normal mechanic shop maybe. That being said, you do have like some Matco and maybe...
Yeah, those red ones that are here, the oldest ones, I think have the Matco and Mac name. Okay, we are done with that journal. By my gauge, I finished ever so slightly smaller than I wanted to be. So let's see what that reflects on the actual micrometer.
What's the coolant we're running right now? SimCool, SimStar 540.
Okay, 2.6037. And it's just like I thought. I'm just 1/10,000th shy of my magic number.
Which is fine, because that's still...
Yeah, we're still well within the 1,000th range. Actually, you should probably say a thank you to our friend Dave down at Mile High Crank, because he's the one that gave me the name of that coolant we're using right now. And I like it a lot better than what we had been using before. But it's just night and day difference in the way it grinds, the way, the ease of keeping the machine clean. It doesn't get all gummy like that other stuff was.
How much of the wheel is consumed during the dressing procedure? And how long does a wheel last?
Well, not very much is consumed, because when you run that diamond across there, I don't imagine we take more than even a couple thousandths off the outside of the wheel. And how long does the wheel last? Well, that depends on how much you're grinding. Shop like ours, wheels last us a long, long time. I know we have broken 2 wheels over the years just in the process of changing them.
Dropping them while you're trying to change them?
Yeah, either drop the wheel, and I remember one time the machine was stopped and we traversed across and bumped the wheel with head or tailstock here and broke a chunk out of one.
Yikes.
Well, at least it wasn't spinning at the time.
Yeah. Well, somebody asked if you have to balance the grinding wheel.
Yes, you do.
So yes, you do balance the wheel.
Yes.
Before you mount it, or
how is it? Onto the hub. Then it has to be balanced. Then you put it on the machine. You dress it, take it off, balance it again. It's kind of a time-consuming process, but you can definitely tell in the finish on the grind if they're not balanced properly.
Does it just kind of chatter? Or?
It makes a lot of times, I don't even know how to describe it, but you can see a pattern across the wheel.
Huh. People want to know, do you have to balance the crank after grinding? Well, we kind of covered that on that scat crank a while back. Pretty much doesn't change.
Whatever you grind off the crank, you put back on with the bearings, so it doesn't change your balance very much.
I suppose if you were going to change the index a bunch,
that would.
And maybe even the stroke length might actually have a little bit of an effect.
That's what I was thinking. Stroke length would probably change it more than anything. But again, we're talking a couple thousandths. Is it even detectable?
Does balancing cause scratches or scuffs on the crankshaft? It can.
It can if you're not careful about keeping the dirt and debris out of there when you're drilling your holes.
What seems to work good for us is to grind the crankshaft, then balance it, then polish.
Yeah.
Speaking of polishing, how much does polishing change your measurements? A couple tenths?
Maybe.
Hopefully less?
Yeah, it's pretty insignificant. If you're having to polish that much off, you didn't do a good grind.
Are all crankshafts this finely tuned?
No. We're demonstrating grinding a crank here. We're having fun doing it. We're not doing this trying to make money.
But we have shown, again, on that 383 crank a while back, actually 2 of them looked like from more of a factory setting.
Yeah.
And they're definitely not the same as what you grind. Does the crankshaft grinder main motor run on 3-phase power? Yeah.
Yes. This one I got a couple tenths wiggle in the needle. Sometimes I just have trouble with the crank wanting to be just a little bit out of round.
That came in pretty good, actually.
Yeah, it's less than that time it kind of sparks out here. So there, we're done grinding.
Here's a question. How much weaker is a crankshaft like this by the time you take it to 20 thousandths undersize compared to stock?
Okay, 1.6036, so I'm 2 tenths under there. 1.6037, so we're good. How much weaker is the crank? I honestly don't think you could measure the difference. I ground this one time to show people what happens. This here at the end where I started is standard size, then it's 10 under, 20, 30, 40, 50. This is 60 under, and then back to standard size again. So you can see 60 under leaves a pretty good edge there. But if you're going from standard size to the first step there, 10 under, I don't think you can measure the difference in the strength of it.
Yeah.
Where the strength comes from is that radius in the corner of the journals.
If you get rid of that radius and leave a sharp corner there, you have a stress riser, and it's just, like you said, it's gonna break.
Okay, there it's grinding pretty even. I probably could have taken a file and knocked that off there, but I thought the crank grinder here would do it a little truer.
So I wasn't paying attention, I guess. When you were grinding these two, did you move the steady rest?
No.
Okay, so you just left the steady rest in the center.
Right. Once you get that crank set up on the mains, you just leave the center steady rest in the middle the entire time.
Okay.
Sometimes if you've got a big heavy 6-cylinder crank, or certainly if you're going to do a straight 8, old straight 8 crank, something like that, you actually can set up 2 steady rests.
Yeah.
Those holes are really hard to brush out on this.
They're kind of nasty. But it, oh, dick. You think they knew that we'd be rebuilding these things 76 years later?
I think they designed these to be rebuilt, but I honestly can't believe that they would have thought 76 years later we'd still be doing it.
Okay, so what kind of belt is this?
This is a Scotch-Brite belt. Sometimes we use this abrasive aircloth belt, but a crank that came out as nice and smooth as this is, I'm just going to use the Scotch-Brite belt on it. What do you think it looks of that?
Blowed off once.
Okay, one thing we want to point out here is when you grind a crankshaft, it needs to be ground. Boy, that thing's got some really bad marks in it there. It wants to be ground so that when the grinder grinds the material off, it'll always lay over at the microscopic level. It'll lay over the little pieces of metal,
Burrs.
and little burrs, and you want those to lay in the direction of rotation, just like the fur on the back of a cat. You know, you try to pet a cat backwards and their fur just all raises up and you can't get through it. Well, it's the same way on a crankshaft. There is fur on that journal at the microscopic level from grinding, and you want that fur laying the direction so that when the crankshaft is rotating, it's laid back instead of digging into the bearing. So in order to do that, we mount the crankshaft in the grinder such that when we grind, we're actually grinding the wrong direction and laying the fur to where it would dig into the bearing. But then when we come back and polish, because of the direction of rotation of that belt running faster than what this crankshaft is turning, it's pulling that fur towards me. In fact, a lot of times you get done grinding and I'll have dust on stuck on my belly here because it's pulling it towards me. And that in turn lays those burrs back over and breaks off more of them to make the crankshaft actually smoother, and lays what's left in the direction of rotation so that it's not digging into the bearings. Because we get a lot of questions about that, because years ago, in fact when we started out, we used to put the crank in the machine the opposite direction, and we ground and polished in the same direction to lay those burrs all one way. But then we found out over the years and through other people's research that if you grind one direction and polish the other, you'll actually break more of those off and have a smoother finish.
The way you do it now is the way that Clevite recommends.
Yeah.
And they're arguably the bearing
I think
experts.
Yeah, they know far more about bearings than we do, and if they say that's the way it should be done, I'm going to agree with them. But that crank's ready to go back in the engine and run again. And I don't know why this has a couple of spots there. It almost looks like it's been drug around on the concrete floor or something. But it has been polished there. It's smooth, but it's a cosmetic defect. I don't think it'll affect the seal any. Clean the machine up, go home.
That looks really nice. A lot nicer than it did when it came in here. I won't say it looks better than it did in 1948, but it might.
I'll bet that finish is every bit as good, if not better, than it was in 1948. Yeah.
Another expert video from the cleaning guy.
I don't know as though I'd go so far as say that. It's just what we do.
I'm doing it a lot of years. Like and subscribe.
See you guys later.